Welcome to The Whispering House, a spine-chilling saga told in gripping episodes. As dusk falls and the shadows lengthen, we invite you to step inside a realm where the ordinary becomes sinister and the whispers of the past echo through the walls. In this series, follow the unsettling journey of Lila, a brave soul drawn into the heart of a house cursed with malevolent secrets. Each installment unravels a new layer of terror, from ghostly apparitions to cryptic messages that promise to unearth dark truths hidden in the very fabric of the house. Prepare for a tale where every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the candlelight, and every whisper in the dark will pull you deeper into a web of horror and intrigue. With each episode, the story grows darker, the danger more palpable, and the mystery more entangled. Join us as we explore the Whispering House, where the past lingers and the darkness speaks. Are you ready to hear what the house has to say? Chapter 1. The House on Ridgeway Lane. Nestled at the end of Ridgeway Lane, the old house stood like a silent sentinel, watching over the town for decades. Its weathered facade was hidden beneath a thick layer of ivy, and its windows, long devoid of glass, gaped like empty eye sockets. No one in the town of Ashford could recall the last time anyone had lived there, but rumors about the house abounded. It was said that the house was alive, that it breathed with the wind and whispered to those who dared to approach. Children dared each other to spend a night inside, but none ever returned after dark. Some claimed they heard faint whispers through the walls, while others spoke of cold, unseen hands brushing against them. The town had learned to leave the house alone, treating it as a forgotten relic of a time long past. But for Lila, the house was more than just a spooky tale. It was a mystery she was determined to solve. Lila had always been drawn to the strange and the unexplained. Growing up, she had spent countless hours in the town's small library, poring over dusty books on local legends and ghost stories. The Whispering House, as the locals called it, had fascinated her since childhood, and now, at 26, she was ready to uncover its secrets. Armed with a camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, Lila set out for Ridgeway Lane on a chilly autumn evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the town, and a thick fog was beginning to roll in from the nearby woods. As she walked, Lila felt a growing sense of unease. The streets were eerily quiet, and the usual sounds of crickets and distant traffic were absent, as if the town itself were holding its breath. When she reached the house, Lila hesitated for a moment, taking in its imposing structure. The door, once painted a vibrant red, was now faded and cracked, barely hanging on its rusted hinges. The windows were dark, and the air around the house felt heavy, almost oppressive. Gathering her courage, Lila pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was just as she had imagined, dusty, with cobwebs draped over the corners like tattered curtains. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the floorboards groaned under her weight. But there was something else, too, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like the murmur of distant voices. Lila turned on her flashlight and began to explore, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was a maze of narrow hallways and empty rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. As she moved deeper into the house, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. She couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, as if the house were alive and trying to communicate with her. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, Lila found a small, dusty mirror hanging on the wall. It was cracked and tarnished, but as she wiped away the grime, she noticed something strange. Her reflection was distorted, almost as if the mirror were trying to show her something else. She leaned in closer, her breath fogging up the glass. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadowy figure standing behind her, but when she turned around, the room was empty. The whispers grew louder. Determined to uncover the source of the whispers, Lila continued her exploration. In the basement, she found a door that had been boarded up. The wood was old and brittle, and with some effort, she managed to pry the boards loose. Behind the door was a small, dark room with stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center of the room was an old, wooden chair, and on the floor beside it, a pile of yellowed papers. Lila picked up the papers, her hands trembling. They were covered in frantic, scrawled handwriting, detailing the thoughts of someone slowly losing their sanity. The writer spoke of voices, of the house speaking to them, telling them to do terrible things. The last entry was particularly disturbing. It spoke of a ritual, of an offering that had to be made to appease the house. As Lila read, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The air in the room grew colder, and she felt a presence behind her. Slowly, she turned around. Standing in the doorway was a figure, its face hidden in shadow. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long, bony fingers that reached out towards her. The whispers became a deafening chorus, and Lila felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She screamed and stumbled back, dropping the papers. The figure stepped into the room, and as it did, Lila saw its face, a twisted, grotesque mask of pain and terror. With a surge of adrenaline, Lila bolted from the room, racing up the stairs and out of the house. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more frantic, as if the house itself were desperate to keep her inside. She didn't stop running until she was back in the safety of her own home. The door locked and bolted behind her. But even then, the whispers lingered in her mind, a haunting reminder of what she had discovered. Lila knew she couldn't leave it alone. The house had secrets, dark and terrible secrets that needed to be uncovered. And she was determined to find them, no matter the cost. Chapter 2. The Ritual. The next day, Lila returned to the house on Ridgeway Lane. The fog had lifted and the sun was shining, but the house seemed even more foreboding in the daylight. The whispers were silent now, but she could feel them, like a low hum just beneath the surface. This time, she was better prepared. She had brought a recorder, hoping to capture the whispers, and a small bottle of holy water, just in case. As she stepped inside, the air grew cold, and the floorboards creaked under her weight. The house was exactly as she had left it, but there was something different, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She made her way back to the basement, her heart pounding in her chest. The door to the small room was still open, and the chair and papers were just as she had left them. But there was something else, a faint, glowing symbol on the floor, one she hadn't noticed before. It was a circle, surrounded by strange, intricate markings. In the center of the circle was a small, blackened object, barely visible in the dim light. Lila knelt down to examine the object. It was a charred piece of bone, small and fragile, as if it had been burned in a fire. She reached out to touch it, but as soon as her fingers brushed against it, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. The house was angry. Lila quickly backed away, her heart racing. She knew she had to leave, but something was drawing her back. Something powerful and malevolent. The house wanted her to stay, to finish what she had started. But Lila wasn't going to give in. She turned to leave, but as she did, the door slammed shut, trapping her inside. Panic set in as she tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and she could feel the air growing colder. She was trapped, and the house was closing in on her. In a last-ditch effort, Lila pulled out the bottle of holy water and splashed it on the floor. The whispers suddenly stopped, and the air grew still. The door creaked open, and she bolted from the room, not stopping until she was outside in the sunlight. She knew she couldn't go back, not now. The house had shown her its true power, and she was no match for it. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had left something behind, something important. And deep down, she knew the house wasn't finished with her yet. Chapter 3. The Investigation. Over the next few days, Lila tried to put the house out of her mind, but it was no use. The whispers haunted her dreams, and she found herself constantly thinking about the symbol and the charred bone. She knew she needed answers, and there was only one place she could find them. The town's library was small, but it had a surprisingly extensive collection of local history. Lila spent hours poring over old newspapers and records, looking for anything that might explain the house's dark past. Finally, she found something, a series of articles from the 1920s about a family that had lived in the house on Ridgeway Lane. The family had been wealthy, well-respected members of the community, but something had happened to them, something terrible. The articles were vague, but they spoke of strange occurrences at the house, voices, strange symbols, and unexplained deaths. The family had apparently been involved in some sort of ritual, one that had gone horribly wrong. Lila felt a chill run down her spine as she read the articles. The house was cursed, that much was clear. But what had caused the curse? And why was the house still haunted after all these years? Determined to find out, Lila decided to visit the town's archives, hoping to find more information about the family and the ritual. The archives were located in the basement of the town hall, and as Lila descended the narrow staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The archives were dusty and dimly lit, filled with rows of old filing cabinets and shelves of yellowed papers. Lila began her search, pulling out file after file, but finding nothing that could explain the house's dark history. Finally, after hours of searching, she found something, a journal hidden away in a forgotten corner of the archives. The journal was old, the pages yellowed and brittle, but the handwriting was still legible. The journal belonged to the family's matriarch, a woman named Eleanor. As Lila read, she realized that Eleanor had been involved in something dark, something forbidden. The journal spoke of a ritual, one that required a human sacrifice. Eleanor had apparently believed that the ritual would grant her immortality, but something had gone wrong. The ritual had backfired, and instead of gaining eternal life, Eleanor had unleashed something evil into the house. The final entry in the journal was chilling. Eleanor wrote of hearing voices, of the house speaking to her, telling her to do terrible things. She had tried to stop it, but it was too late. The house was alive, and it was hungry. Lila felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she closed the journal. She now knew the truth. The house on Ridgeway Lane was cursed, and the curse had been passed down through the generations. But there was one thing she didn't understand. Why was the house still haunted after all these years? Determined to find out, Lila decided to return to the house one last time. She knew it was dangerous, but she had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 4. The Final Confrontation. As Lila approached the house, she could feel the air growing colder, the whispers starting to return. She steeled herself and stepped inside, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The house was silent, but she could feel the presence lurking just beneath the surface. The whispers were faint, almost like a distant memory, but they were there, waiting for her. Lila made her way to the basement, her heart pounding in her chest. The door to the small room was still open, and the chair and papers were just as she had left them. But the symbol on the floor was glowing, brighter than before. She knelt down and examined the symbol, her fingers tracing the intricate markings. The charred bone was still there, but it seemed to be pulsing with a strange, otherworldly energy. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The air grew colder, and Lila felt a presence behind her. Slowly, she turned around. Standing in the doorway was the same figure she had seen before, its face twisted in a grotesque mask of pain and terror. The whispers became a deafening chorus, and Lila felt a cold hand on her shoulder. But this time, she didn't run. She stood her ground, staring the figure down, determined to uncover the truth. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The air around Lila grew colder, and she felt a crushing pressure on her chest. But she didn't back down. "You're trapped here, aren't you?" she said, her voice shaking. "The ritual went wrong, and now you're stuck in this house, unable to move on." The figure's face twisted in a grotesque grin, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "But why?" Lila demanded. "Why are you still here? What do you want from me?" The figure didn't answer, but the whispers suddenly stopped, and the air grew still. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from all around her, Lila heard a single word: sacrifice. Lila felt a cold shiver run down her spine as the word echoed in her mind. The house was demanding a sacrifice, just as it had done all those years ago. But Lila wasn't going to give in. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I won't do it. I won't let you take me." The figure's grin faded, replaced by a look of anger and desperation. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, and the air around Lila grew colder, more oppressive. But Lila stood her ground, refusing to back down. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice strong. "You can't control me." The figure let out a low, guttural growl, and the whispers became a deafening roar. The air grew colder, and Lila felt the pressure on her chest growing stronger. But she didn't back down. "You're trapped here," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not. I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The figure let out a final, furious roar, and the whispers suddenly stopped. The air grew still, and the figure slowly began to fade, its twisted grin replaced by a look of defeat. As the figure disappeared, the symbol on the floor began to fade, and the air in the room grew warmer. The house seemed to release its hold on Lila, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had won. Slowly, Lila stood up and made her way out of the house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the town, but for the first time in days, she felt free. She knew the house would never truly be at peace, but she had faced her fears and come out stronger. And as she walked away from the house on Ridgeway Lane, she knew that she would never forget the whispers that had haunted her, or the dark secrets she had uncovered. But she also knew that she would never let them control her again. Chapter 5. The Return. Days passed, but Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The house on Ridgeway Lane had been quiet since her last visit, but she couldn't forget the final word it had whispered: sacrifice. It echoed in her mind, growing louder with each passing day. She tried to go about her life, but the sense of unease lingered, a constant presence just out of sight. Even the town seemed different, darker, quieter, as if the house's malevolent influence had seeped into every corner. One night, as she was lying in bed, Lila heard a noise outside her window, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. Her heart skipped a beat as she listened, straining to catch the words. It was faint, but unmistakable, the same whisper she had heard in the house. She sat up, her pulse racing. The whispers were back, but how? She had faced the house, confronted its darkness. Hadn't she broken free? The whisper grew louder, more insistent, until it filled her room with a chilling presence. Lila's hands trembled as she reached for the small bottle of holy water on her nightstand, the one she had kept with her since that night. But as she clutched it tightly, she realized something terrifying. The whispers weren't coming from outside. They were inside her head. Frantic, Lila splashed the holy water around her room, hoping to banish whatever was tormenting her. But the whispers only grew louder, a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words overlapping in a maddening chorus. Sacrifice. Lila stumbled out of bed, nearly tripping over her feet as she fled from the room. She needed to get out of the house, away from the whispers. But as she reached the front door, she froze. There, standing in the doorway, was the same shadowy figure from Ridgeway Lane. It was taller now, more solid, its features more defined. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its twisted grin sent a jolt of fear through Lila's heart. The whispers became a roar, filling her mind with their terrible command. Sacrifice. Lila tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. The figure stepped closer, its long, bony fingers reaching out toward her. She backed away, desperate to escape, but the room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing closer, trapping her inside. She had to do something, anything, to break free. In a blind panic, Lila grabbed a heavy lamp from the table beside her and swung it at the figure. The lamp passed through it as if it were made of smoke, shattering against the wall. The figure didn't even flinch. Sacrifice. It whispered again, its voice cold and hollow. Lila's mind raced, searching for a way out. But the more she tried to think, the more the whispers consumed her thoughts, drowning out everything else. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the whispers stopped. Silence filled the room, so thick it was almost suffocating. The figure stood motionless, its glowing eyes fixed on Lila. For a moment, she dared to hope that it was over, that the nightmare had finally ended. But then the figure spoke, its voice low and menacing. "You cannot escape," it said, the words sending a chill down her spine. "The house is part of you now. You belong to it." The room seemed to spin around her, the walls melting into darkness. Lila felt herself falling, spiraling into the void, as the figure's words echoed in her mind. She landed with a jolt, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Gasping, she looked around, trying to make sense of her surroundings. She was back in the house on Ridgeway Lane. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had never really left. The house had let her think she was free, only to pull her back in when she least expected it. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling her mind with their terrible demands. The air grew cold, and the room darkened as the shadowy figure stepped toward her, its twisted grin widening. Sacrifice, it whispered again, its voice echoing in her mind. Lila knew what it wanted. The house had taken countless lives before, and now it wanted hers. But she wasn't going to let it win. Gathering every ounce of strength she had left, Lila stood up and faced the figure. Her hands were trembling, her heart pounding, but she refused to back down. "I won't do it," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't make me." The figure's grin faded, replaced by a look of anger and frustration. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but Lila stood her ground, refusing to give in. "I am stronger than you," she said, her voice growing steadier. "I will not be your sacrifice." The figure let out a furious roar, and the room shook with its rage. The walls cracked and splintered, the floor buckling beneath her feet. But Lila didn't waver. She had faced the house's darkness once before, and she would do it again. The whispers became a deafening scream, the sound tearing through her mind like a blade. But Lila held on, refusing to let the house take her. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The figure wavered, its form flickering like a dying flame. The room grew warmer, the darkness receding. Lila could feel the house's grip on her weakening, its power fading. She had won. The figure let out one final, desperate whisper before it dissolved into nothingness. Sacrifice. But the word had no power over her anymore. Lila turned and walked out of the house, leaving the whispers behind. As she stepped into the sunlight, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The house had lost, and she was free. But deep down, she knew the house wasn't gone. Its darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. But as long as she was alive, she would make sure it never claimed another soul. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The days following Lila's final confrontation with the house passed in a blur. She avoided Ridgeway Lane, unwilling to even look in the direction of the house. She tried to go back to her normal life, but something had changed. The world felt different, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a darker truth beneath the surface. Lila found herself jumping at every shadow, her mind constantly replaying the events of that night. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them lingered, haunting her every thought. She knew the house was still out there, waiting, and that knowledge weighed on her like a heavy burden. One evening, as she was walking home from the grocery store, Lila noticed a small flyer pinned to a bulletin board outside the town hall. It was a missing persons notice. Another teenager had disappeared, last seen near Ridgeway Lane. Her heart sank. She had hoped that by confronting the house, she had put an end to its horrors. But it seemed the house's hunger was insatiable. Determined to do something, Lila made her way to the police station. She had tried to explain the situation to the authorities before, but they had dismissed her as a hysterical woman with an overactive imagination. But now, with another person missing, she hoped they might take her seriously. As she walked into the station, she noticed the somber expressions on the officers' faces. The town had seen its share of strange disappearances over the years, but this one seemed different, more personal, more terrifying. Lila approached the front desk, her nerves on edge. The officer on duty looked up, his eyes weary. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tinged with fatigue. I have information about the missing person," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's about the house on Ridgeway Lane." The officer's expression hardened. "We've heard all the stories about that house," he said dismissively. "Ghosts, curses, none of it's real. We're dealing with a real missing person here, not some ghost story." "But it is real," Lila insisted. "The house is cursed. It takes people. You have to believe me." The officer sighed, clearly unimpressed. "We're doing everything we can to find the missing person, but we're not chasing after ghosts." Lila felt a surge of frustration. How could they be so blind? She knew the house was responsible, but without proof, they would never believe her. Dejected, she left the station, her mind racing. If the authorities wouldn't help, she would have to do something on her own. She couldn't let the house claim another victim. That night, Lila sat at her kitchen table, staring at the small bottle of holy water. It had saved her before, but she wasn't sure it would be enough this time. The house was growing stronger, more desperate. If she was going to stop it, she would need more than just holy water. She needed to find a way to break the curse once and for all. Lila spent the next few days researching everything she could about curses, rituals, and ancient magic. The library's collection was limited, but she managed to find a few old texts that spoke of ways to banish dark spirits and break curses. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One text in particular caught her attention. It spoke of a ritual, similar to the one Eleanor had attempted, but with a different purpose. Instead of granting immortality, this ritual was designed to trap a spirit in a physical object, rendering it powerless. It was dangerous, and there were no guarantees it would work. But it was the only option she had. With a sense of grim determination, Lila gathered the materials she needed for the ritual: a mirror, a candle, salt, and a piece of obsidian. She wasn't sure if it would be enough, but it was all she had. On the night of the new moon, Lila made her way back to Ridgeway Lane. The house loomed in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes staring down at her. The whispers had already started, faint and distant, but growing stronger as she approached. She entered the house, her hands trembling as she lit the candle and placed it in front of the mirror. The salt was sprinkled in a circle around her, a protective barrier against whatever the house might throw at her. Taking a deep breath, Lila began to chant the words from the text, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, but she didn't stop. She could feel the house's presence all around her, pressing in on her, trying to break her concentration. But she wouldn't let it win. As she finished the chant, the candle flickered, the flames sputtering as if struggling against an invisible wind. The whispers became a deafening roar, the air vibrating with the house's fury. Lila held up the piece of obsidian, focusing all her energy on the ritual. She could feel the house fighting back, trying to resist, but she pushed harder, pouring every ounce of her willpower into the chant. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, Lila thought the house might overwhelm her. But then, with a final, desperate cry, the whispers stopped. Silence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. The candle's flame went out, plunging Lila into darkness. She stood there, her heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. And then, slowly, she felt it, the house's presence, receding, retreating back into the shadows. The weight that had been pressing down on her lifted, and the air grew warmer. She had done it. The curse was broken. Lila let out a shaky breath, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. She had won, but at a cost. The ritual had taken everything she had, leaving her exhausted and drained. But the house was silent. The whispers were gone. Lila left Ridgeway Lane for the last time, the piece of obsidian clutched tightly in her hand. She knew the house would never be able to hurt anyone again. It was over, but as she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. The house was silent, but the memory of its darkness would stay with her forever. And deep down, she knew that some shadows could never truly be banished.